Welcome, future pilots. Let's skip the fluff and jump straight into mastering aviation law's low-flying regulations. Look, if you're prepping for your ground exam, you already know these rules can get, well, a little tangled up. But don't worry, in today's explainer, we're going to break it all down so it actually sticks. To make this super easy to remember, we aren't just going to stare at a boring list of rules. Instead, we're going to simulate a single continuous flight. We'll take off, fly right over a bustling city, cruise past a packed stadium, and finally end up out in the open countryside. By mapping these spatial rules onto a real-world scenario, you're going to lock this information right into your brain for exam day. Section 1. The baseline rule. Power failure. So before we even look at specific altitudes, numbers, or distances, there is an absolute foundation you need to know. It's the overarching principle for everything else. An aircraft must not be flown below a height that would enable you to make an emergency landing without danger to persons or property on the surface in the event of a power unit failure. Exam alert here, folks. Pay close attention to that exact phrasing. Without danger to persons or property on the surface. Basically, no matter where you're flying, this golden rule is always running in the background.
Section 2. City limits, congested areas.
Okay, so our flight has taken off and we're heading right over a bustling city. Notice the specific wording here. You absolutely need to memorize this exact definition because, trust me, it pops up on the test all the time. What's really interesting is that a congested area isn't just a city center packed with skyscrapers. It's literally any area of a city, town, or settlement substantially used for residential, industrial, commercial, or recreational purposes. So a sprawling suburban neighborhood? Congested. A massive industrial park? Yep, that's congested too.
When you're flying over these settlements, the rules tighten up significantly. And note that these specific constraints apply to all aircraft, well, except helicopters. If you're flying a fixed-wing aircraft over a congested area, you cannot fly below a height that meets two very specific overlapping conditions. Let's look at the first one.
Condition 1 is the land clear rule. Building right on top of our baseline rule. If your engine quits, you must be high enough to glide and land completely clear of that congested area. You can't just cross your fingers and aim for an empty street. You need the altitude to glide all the way out of that residential, commercial, or industrial zone.
But wait, that's not the only condition. The second one introduces our first major numerical threshold of this explainer, the 1,000 feet rule.
Let's see how this builds, because honestly, this is where students almost always get tripped up. The rule states you cannot fly below 1,000 feet above the highest obstacle within a 600-meter radius of your aircraft. So picture a 600-meter circle on the ground directly below your plane. Find the absolute tallest building or antenna inside that circle. You must be at least 1,000 feet above that specific obstacle. So here's the kicker. You evaluate the land clear height. Then you evaluate the 1,000 feet above the highest obstacle within 600 meters height, and you absolutely must fly at whichever height is higher, no exceptions.
Well, actually, scratch that. There is one exception, because you do have to get back on the ground eventually, right? The only time you're exempt from this strict congested area rule is when taking off from or landing at a licensed or government aerodrome, as long as you're following normal aviation practice. You know, you can't just dive bomb the runway, but your standard approaches and departures are completely exempt. Section 3. Crowds, open air assemblies. Moving along our flight path, we've cleared the city center and now we're passing over a massive, packed stadium. Grab your notepads for this one. Ground exams absolutely love testing you on the difference between the vertical altitude rules and the horizontal distance rules for assemblies. So let's put them side by side to make it crystal clear. Vertically, the rule is pretty similar to the congested area rule. Unless you have explicit, written permission from the CAA, you must not fly over an organized open-air assembly below 1,000 feet or a height that would let you land clear of the assembly if your engine fails. And just like before, you have to comply with whichever of those two heights is higher. Now, what's really fascinating here, and a classic trap to watch out for, is the horizontal rule. Notice the sudden shift in units. Vertically, we were talking in feet. Horizontally, we switched to meters. You cannot take off or land within 1,000 meters of an open-air assembly of more than 1,000 people. So think 1,000 meters for 1,000 people. Lock that numeric pairing right into your mind. There are only two ways you can legally bypass this horizontal distance rule. First, if you're at an aerodrome operating under procedures notified by the CAA.
Second, if you're at any other landing site operating under CAA notified procedures and you have written permission from the assembly organizer, you're going to need both of those permissions for off-aerodrome sites.
Section 4, the 500 feet minimum. Finally, our flight leaves the crowds and city behind, taking us out into the wide-open countryside. In the UK, the baseline rule out here is that an aircraft must not fly closer than 500 feet to any person, vessel, vehicle, or structure. Think of it like a giant 500-foot invisible bubble protecting your aircraft in all directions. If there's someone walking their dog, a tractor, a boat, or a barn, your bubble simply cannot touch them. You'll want to remember 3 main exceptions to this 500-foot bubble for the exam. Number 1, taking off or landing following normal aviation practice. Number 2, a glider doing hill soaring. And number 3, a helicopter engaged in air taxiing. If you fall into one of those 3 buckets, the 500-foot rule is temporarily paused. And this brings us to another absolute classic exam trap. Examiners love to test if you know the nuance between the UK National Distance Rule we just talked about and ESA legislation, because trust me, they are definitely not the same thing. See, while the UK rule specifies being 500 feet away from things like people or structures, meaning you could technically fly lower if the area is totally deserted, EASA legislation takes a different approach. EASA sets an absolute minimum height. Under their rules, an aircraft must not fly at a height of less than 500 feet above the surface, period. It doesn't matter if there's not a single person or structure in sight. So, as you're hitting the books to prepare for your ground exam, I really want you to consider how these individual regulations overlap. Because aviation law is all about layers, and mastering how those layers stack up is the key to acing this test. To test yourself, think about this. If a single tall structure is just sitting in a totally empty field, how do the 500-foot bubble rule and the overarching power failure rule interact to dictate your legal altitude? Think on that one. Fly safe, study hard, and don't forget to click subscribe for more highly focused ground school explainers. See you next time.